first for the last session of this this excellent conference with very good sessions. I myself hanged around in the previous one a bit too long, but anyhow, here we go. So my name is Tuomo Kauranne. I'm the president of Arbonaut Limited, and Arbonaut is a company that has for the last 20 years carried out forest inventory based on airborne laser scanning, field measurements, satellite measurements on 6 continents and 30 odd countries. And we've also been engaged in RED+ projects for 12 years or so, also on many continents and 20+ countries. And today's panel is about the importance of digital information about forest ecosystems. And we have 3 excellent panelists. But let me just first somehow reflect on the history. It is maybe my 6 years since I first joined Warren's conferences, and what has stayed constant is the focus on investment. I mean, we always talk about money, about investment, but what a change we have seen in terms of the scope of that investment. You know, 6 years ago, everything was still about timber, forest management, pulp and paper, where is the productivity best, what kind of forest land you should buy. This time around, I think every single presentation, or majority of them anyway, has been about climate, ecosystem services, nature-based solutions. So it really seems that the importance of forest has increased dramatically and into the holistic direction, into ecosystems. And we sort of understand their importance to the entire scope of life on Earth. Now, another thing that seems to have come into focus is scale, investment scale, precision, and terms like high quality carbon. All kind of things that seem to be lacking, or at least in short supply on the market. And I hope this session will give some guidance to all of you, or some directions where to seek for this kind of qualities in the, what we all hope, of coming flood of investment in forest ecosystems. So digital twins of forest ecosystems, remote sensing, more precise data, mathematical models even that tell how they behave, should form the basis of investment in ecosystems. And we have, in addition to the ecosystem services, also ecological risks, wildfires, the quite massive bark beetle damage in Central Europe over the last 3 years. And all of these also have to be addressed as risks to investment, but also like natural phenomena we need to understand better. So what I hope these very experienced panelists will be able to tell you about is how digital decision support tools will help you mitigate those risks, manage your forest assets better, and basically make better investment decisions on your forest investments. Each of them has an experience of forestry at very large scale. So I think in some ways we probably represent the largest scales in terms of forest area managed, and also in innovation, that every one of the panelists has a provable track record of coming up with totally new things in how forests are managed. And so I'm really happy to be able to introduce you to Sixten Sunebacka, executive partner of the MW Forest Sense, Josh Roberts, innovation manager at Forestry and Land Scotland, and Matt Tybursky, the CTO of Global Surface Intelligence. And gentlemen, please take a few minutes to introduce your own history and your view on the issue. Sixten, you go first.
Thank you, Tuomo, and good afternoon to you all. And as Tuomo said, my name is Sixten Sunebacka, and I'm working with the company called Forest Sense, a Swedish company. Previously, I was working as the CAO of Tornator, that is the biggest private forest owner in Finland and Estonia, owning forest also in Romania. And before that, I was working for the Finnish government with the bioeconomy strategy for Finland as the head of that work and for the also concerning the forest sector at the ministry. And before that, I was working for the forest industry for many years. The last 5 years, I was the head of the forest division for the global forest company UPM. That was shortly. Thank you.
Josh, please. You're muted, Josh, I'm afraid. We can't hear you. It's still... All right, I wonder, there's a connection problem. Maybe we let Matt go in between, and then please see if you can make yourself audible. I certainly hope that very much. So Matt,
yes.
Please go ahead here.
Tuomo, just a test. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
I'm Matt Tybursky. I'm a founder of Global Surface Intelligence. We're a Scottish-based company. We operate in multiple geographical markets. One of our focuses is forestry. It's actually becoming our major focus. Within forestry, we specifically develop a data product around LiDAR, where what we develop, rather than going out and taking the pictures of LiDAR, we integrate LiDAR with remote sensing imagery, and we also integrate that with ground-based measures. We have operated, I think I've been asked to come onto this discussion by Tuomo to give some perspective on at least our small experience in carbon markets. And to that end, we've operated mainly out of the US carbon markets. And we generally work with project developers. And we work with some very smart project developers. We effectively provide building blocks for those types of companies that actually develop forest carbon projects to actually, appraise the asset, etc. And in terms of scalability, I think where we've been kind of novel on our end is scaling single LiDAR images to, I'd say, state level in the US, multi-state level analyses, where we operate a software as a service platform, where we provide information to clients through that platform. That's,
okay,
I think,
thanks, Matt. Let's see, Josh, if we can hear you this time. Still no luck. Yeah, okay, maybe you need to leave and reconnect or whatever normally works. I mean, Josh is actually a tech guru, but we'll see how does it go. So I'll move on to the first questions, and again, I'll let first Sixten and then Matt say their dues, and then we'll see if Josh is able to rejoin us. So let's start. Where do you see accurate digital forest information to have the greatest impact in the next, let's say, 5 years, Sixten?
If you divide forest information, for example, into 3 different sectors of use, first you could speak about forest resource information, then about operational information regarding harvesting and silviculture needs, and then the third one could be environmental and risk information. And you could say that we have quite good information on resources and operations of the first ones, but of course we need more accurate information and with more accurate information from resources and operational circumstances. We will have more added value in form of, for example, improved growth in the forests or higher sustainable felling possibilities, etc. But I see the greatest impact potential is on the environmental and risk information sector. So today we don't know for example, how much dead wood is in the forests on a local level, on a landscape or country level, yes, much better, but not on a local level. And therefore, we cannot optimize, for example, conservation needs based on facts. And this I see as a big step if we are able to take that. Neither we can proactively mitigate, for example, wildfires and bark beetle risks based on facts. So we need accurate information of the ecosystem as a whole. That is for sure, and it will have in the future years a really great impact, I think.
Okay, thank you, Sixten. What about you, Matt? You take a bit different angle into this. So where do you see?
You know, I took a more of a technical angle when I was preparing for this, and maybe I'll scale out of it. But we kind of perceive accuracy as a cost, and it's one of the things that we generally negotiate with. Where it's to have this much interest right now in forestry, and specifically investing into forestry. It's nice for business operating in forestry, but ultimately information is a cost. And I think, at least from GSI's point of view, we appraise our costs depending on if it's product level accuracy or something very specific and precise, where you could say product level accuracy may be useful probably for a strategic purpose, something like an asset acquisition, where when you actually begin to move towards operational forestry, the cost is going to go up depending on what specific type of measurement you're actually trying to operate around. So maybe in the next, reflecting on that question and to answer in the next 5 years, I think if there's going to be continued growth in forestry, there's going to need to be a combination of both perhaps not so accurate information, but accurate enough information to drive that type of investment, because we're not going to, I don't think every forest that is going to be acquired and managed, it's going to be difficult to have information to drive the investment. So anyway, I think there's going to be a combination of perhaps low cost and high end methods to evaluate property and forestry specifically.
Okay, thanks, Matt. Let me try to make up a little bit of Josh's absence by just telling about his background and the operations of Forestry and Land Scotland. So Forestry and Land Scotland is an independent authority under the Scottish government, established in 2019, and they manage about 400,000 hectares of timberland in Scotland on behalf of the Scottish government. And they generate a very respectable revenue stream of over £100 million per year from that resource, despite the fact it's rather... Okay, Josh, you're coming online and you're muted, but let's see if you unmute yourself, maybe you can.
Hi, Tuomo. Is this any better
Josh.
this time?
Yes, definitely. I already started introducing you, so please now do it yourself. And please also tell a bit about Forestry and Land Scotland. Really good to have you back.
Yeah, very glad to be back. Thanks, Tuomo. And yeah, sorry about that. So I'm Josh Roberts. I'm the Innovation Manager for Forestry and Land Scotland. Forestry and Land Scotland, for those who don't know, is the government agency that manages the publicly owned forests and land in Scotland. And yeah, we're a land manager that manages about 500,000 hectares of land, about 9% of Scotland's total land area, producing around 3 million cubic meters of timber a year, as well as habitats and all the other really important ecosystem services. And for them, lead on a number of different innovation projects, some of which are digital, some chemical, some mechanical. But yeah, really interesting. And yeah, thanks. Glad to be back.
Yeah, nice, Josh. So I'll let you continue actually already on the next question. So what do you think are the value drivers of digital forest information in forestry, Josh?
Yeah, well, I think that in your introductory words to the start of the panel, I think you really kind of touched on a bit, because I think that there's two main areas to them. You have the efficiency drivers that have always been there in forestry, the pulp and paper and timber, value drivers that have always been there, and to be honest, aren't going away, nor should they go away, particularly in plantation forestry. So those efficiency drivers. But I think you're also really seeing a large increase in growth in protection drivers. So not just trying to get more than what we already have in efficiently, but really trying to protect what we already have from both biotic and abiotic threats, storms, fires, floods, insect pests. And you're almost seeing, an interaction between those two areas, because sometimes they're, complementary. And I think that's where we can see some of the biggest gains, is where we can not only protect what we've already got, which is where the bulk of the ecosystem services already are, but also to try and improve on what we have, because there is a big scope for improvement in the delivery of multiple different ecosystem services, not just timber, from existing forests. So I think that those are the really two schools of, not schools of thought, but complementary areas to think about when looking at value drivers of digital forest information.
Yeah, okay, thanks, Josh. Now, Sixten, then when you talk about these ecological risks that you touched upon and Josh did already as well, so how do you think we should be using digital forest information in mitigating those, and what would you like the ideal way and what needs to happen before that can be achieved?
That is a really good question. But before I answer the question, I would like to come back to Matt's talks about the costs. I would like to see information as an investment. And in Forest Sense, we have discussed this a lot. And what we like to do is to produce not only forest information, but forest intelligence based on accurate information. And when you come so far that you are producing intelligence, then you can say that it is also an investment for the future. And with that investment, you are able to get added value. For example, you can mitigate the ecological risks, as Tuomo asked, how we could mitigate the ecological risks by forest information. So we have those wildfires, bark beetles, storms, and here in north we have also, and on higher altitudes we have snow damages, and also in some areas there may be air and water pollutions that has an impact, negative impact on the ecological circumstances in the forest. So it's the most crucial thing is to identify and quantify the risk before the damage has happened. And this is a quite huge challenge. But with accurate and up-to-date information, we are able to mitigate the risks proactively and with different kinds of actions. With, for example, if we have wildfires, we can mitigate the risk by doing the fellings in a certain way, by building roads, so we are able to get out with the fire brigades when it's needed, and also by improving water supply if we have a big risk area. So there are many things that we can proactively do. It's too late when it's burning. Yeah. That is my message. So we have to be in time, and digitalization enables proactive risk mitigation. we can already identify those fire risks areas, bark beetle damages. We can analyze water flows and water quality. We can analyze the road building conditions on different soils and so on and so on. But still, there is really a lot to be done to mitigate the risks in practice. On a technical level, on a analyzing level, we are already going forward, but in practice, we have a lot to do, I think.
Okay, thanks, Sixten. So I gather from both you and Josh's input that digital information is used to prepare operations and then conduct those operations and planning of operations more efficiently and more precisely targeting exactly the goals of that. So both efficiency and risk mitigation and so on. But in your case, Matt, as you said, you've had some contact to the carbon markets. This is not so much an operational activity compared to the other alternatives, that you have to use the digital information in some other way. So how do you see it to have the greatest impact on carbon markets?
Well, I think at one level, I would also define the market that I can contemplate that on is mainly a US market. If I were to make a comparative conversation about information, even when we discuss Tuomo, like I'm always surprised with Finland, just how good of forestry information you have that as a country, where on the US end, let's say there's in Finland, there's LiDAR information every 5 years everywhere. On the US end, right, there are footprints around the country that are available for free, doesn't update. Beyond that type of information, when one is looking at assets for acquisition, normally there is some old data on what may have existed in a forest at some historical point in time that is made available to a potential purchaser. But then a lot of the risk is on the person who buys the property. And there, as I understand it, at least, I'm not directly a purchaser of properties. So we then assist with providing that type of information. That's a real estate approach. In terms of an operational approach and getting into this question of digital information, I mean, that's a very large question. When I initially thought of that question, I was thinking, what my background is remote sensing. I have a remote sensing PhD, and I also have a law degree, and my law degree specifically focuses on payment for ecosystem services. When I'm talking about remote sensing, digital information, that's going to be different than what someone else contemplates. But in terms then of the carbon market specifically, remote sensing or digital images as an image is not compliant for any type of mechanism that I'm aware of that allows a credit to be issued, and more that you need to manipulate that information to basically forest stands. And once the information is in forest stands, basically polygon information, then that can be used, I would say, as I understand it, more toward a project design document. So then reflecting on forestry and a carbon market, I think that there is going to be a growth in this sector in forest carbon. And I think that we will be, those who are operating in the sector will be finding ways to become more compliant with how carbon trading works versus just taking information and trying to create carbon credits without compliance. So I have to wear a legal hat then and say that it's really up to the carbon trading standards to determine what they want to admit in terms of digital information. The standard right now does not allow raw information. Does that answer your question, Tuomo?
Well, yes, to some extent, definitely. It also,
I'm
of course,
obviously keeping vague in some ways too, because each project, it depends also if it's a project or a product, and if it's kind of looking at project origination or after the property is acquired and what's being done afterward. Each of those phases has its own unique need for information.
Yeah. You also raised or touched upon another important aspect, which is this right to information or publicity of the information, and this certainly is an aspect that will have a role to play in all of these. I mean, if you're a big forest owner like Forestry and Land Scotland yourself, or Tornator used to be, then obviously you can sort of manage your own forest resources as you best see fit. But when we go to the forest properties of others, we have a range of issues that you touched upon. That in Finland we have like this decision after quite some negotiation that relatively precise forest information on all private forest properties can be made available. But then all people using that information must comply with the GDPR privacy doctrine of the European Union, meaning that you actually cannot, in any database, couple that forest information with personal data of the forest owners. You have to somehow circumvent that and get the permission of the forest owners to use that data, but it's made available. Now then, of course, satellite imagery is not regulated by any national law. So in that sense, we've always had this access to all information for free, but it's seldom indeed brought down to bear on the project level or individual property level basis. And so this issue, I think, has to be discussed quite widely. Also, it also goes down to what came up in the previous sessions of the conference about the small-scale landowners and others who are basically creating the ecosystem services that we look forward to seeing, but how they could be sort of brought to share fairly in the value of the information. In the end, information is power. The person or the organization who knows more is able to take advantage that against somebody who doesn't. So it's a wide range of issues that will probably need to be dealt with before, for example, the VCS standard will allow digital information to be used. But let's move on. So we could take a look at, for example, the geographic markets that you're all involved in, and Josh, maybe you can reflect on how do you see digital forest information taken up in Scotland, especially in the case of FLS as an organization.
Yeah, and I think you raise a very interesting point about that adoption of different types of digital forest information, because not all digital forest information is.
Oh, we seem to be losing you again. Let's see if Josh can come back, or will they remain frozen? Okay, maybe. Okay, Josh is rejoining and unmuted. So, all right, please go ahead, Josh. Once again, you're there.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, sorry, I'm coming to you live from inside a hydroelectric dam today, and it's not doing much good for my connection.
All right. Too thick a buffer for radio waves.
Yeah. So sorry about that. I was saying that I think you make a very interesting point about the adoption of digital forest information, because not all digital forest information is the same. With satellite data, you're generating that data series over a wide network, and people can choose to adopt it when they're ready, because you have the time series, you have the spatial series. Whereas something like LiDAR, it's a very deliberate thing that you go into, and you're getting caught up in those, permissions and boundaries and, land holding data, which I think it complicates the issue of adoption. So you're right, a big forest landowner like Forestry and Land Scotland, we have enough area that we can look at deploying that at scale, because we have the scale within our own boundaries. We don't have to complicate things necessarily to start adopting that. Whereas for a small forest owner, either they're not at the scale to make it cost effective, or they have to negotiate into some sort of agreement in Scotland at least to be able to access it. Obviously, you've been through that journey in Finland now and do have that data source, but it was a process that you deliberately had to go through. Whereas for the satellite data, if I wanted to do some, if I want to employ somebody to analyze some satellite data, there is already that historic data set. And I think that's a very important part of the adoption cycle, because you can't go back and collect historic data. You can analyze historic data at any point, but you can't go back and collect historic data. And so understanding that it is an investment for the future, as Sixten said, and saying, okay, I'm not exactly sure of all the potential and the operational uses and the strategic uses of these yet, but I can see that at a fundamental level, we should know more about our forests. And the things that I want to know about my forests are the same as they were 10 years ago, 50 years ago. Maybe not all of them. We're much more interested in carbon now than we were 50 years ago. But in terms of things like timber properties, fire risk, wind throw risk, and drought, I would say that they are still there. So if you can recognize that and say, we should invest, we will be able to analyze the data again and again and again, but I can't go and collect the data again. And so that, I think, as a recognition would be a good path to adoption, but it requires quite a long-term view of it. But I'd say generally foresters are good, should be good at looking at long-term view.
Yeah. Luckily with satellite data, we do have excellent archives of past satellite data, so we can at least sort of go back and try to validate visually what goes on. And I know that Matt's algorithms also use the time dimension for good effect to understanding the forest better. But Sixten, how would you see, let's say, Sweden take up digital forest information?
If we speak about Sweden and also Finland, the situation is much alike. We have good information that is for true, but we have also a very long history in using digital information from forests, and this is also may also make us a bit blind of the possibilities that new technology has. So I would like to say that the forest owners, the forest industry, and other stakeholders are already aware of the need of more accurate and broader information on the forests. We have already in the past seen huge impacts of digitalization with LiDAR, with using harvest and measurement instead of traditional wood measurement methods. We have seen the revolution, you could say, of steering of the operations in forests by mobile connections and this kind of thing. So we have the examples already, but we have not been able to accommodate the new technology as it should have been, because I believe that we are now facing a very huge transition in the use of multi-source digital information in forestry. So we have a lot of new technology. We have drones, we have AI, we have a lot of possibilities on the technical sides. And the cost efficiency has improved significantly. So there is a possibility, and there is obviously also a broad need of accurate information. So I would like to say that now is the time to take the next big step in digitalization of forestry. We have all the tools needed, and the cost level or the investment need is not so huge that it had been before. So it's the added value is much bigger than the investment.
Yeah, All right, thanks, Sixten. Now, I think each of you was somehow implicitly complaining a little bit about the inertia or the slow adoption of new technologies, or even seeing their possibilities among foresters. Forestry is not not traditionally known as a particularly innovative community of people, but that's exactly why I chose you three to attend this panel. And certainly we cannot blame our audience of not being innovative. So let me let me take two of these questions, and I'll pass them on you to Matt for commentary. So first, Warren basically says that, okay, is it possible to apply these methods to tropical forestry? How to mitigate poaching and endangered species protection via satellite imagery? Would that be realistic? Could AI tech such as drones help? And the other question from Marcel de Berg: is it possible to measure the water cycle of the forest, like water in the soil, the amount of water that is being evapotranspired, the amount of clouds and organic aerosols produced? And finally, there's a question by a comment from Giuseppe Berlanda. Forestry intelligence is something coming and coming fast in terms of opportunities. It comes with benefits and costs. To what extent a forest owner is willing to implement intelligence in comparison to revenue? So, you know, in some sense, we see, okay, there's the privacy and tradition and cost issue, but the capability issue. So Matt, maybe you want to take some of these leads and give a comment. Tropical forestry, water cycle, or the willingness of forest owners to adopt AI.
So first, I would say that a long time ago, we had a stronger interest, we being GSI, had a stronger interest at when RED and these types of things were initially developing. Tuomo's done very, very well, you know, providing technical support for those types of programs. GSI as a commercial business, we tend to focus on countries where there are very strong land tenure rights, for a variety of reasons, but ultimately, commercially speaking, you know, we are a commercially focused company. So without strong land tenure rights, there's a reason why I'm saying this. Without strong land tenure rights, and I think this is probably the biggest thing that I would flag, you know, based on also having a degree initially in tropical countries, you know, depending on land tenure rights, you know, it's going to introduce a variety of issues. When dealing with tropical forestry, depending on the strength of those land tenure rights and how strong you can actually enforce them, you can then derive some type of commercial forestry around that. If not, these activities are then difficult to monitor in a commercial way, and it's mainly maybe a kind of an academic research project. And you know, that there's a difference then in terms of what the driver or focus then of AI and the adoption is, because it's always with everything, it's a cost. From a commercial point of view, it's always about cost. So I guess the question is, if you're in a developing country and you're trying to implement a sophisticated technology and the costs are high, I don't know if it's relevant for that situation if whoever may or may not own the land is willing to pay for those costs. I don't know if that is specifically answering the question, but we, i.e. GSI, tend to stay away from areas that do not have very strong land tenure rights, because there's less commercial forestry for us to be an actor in. I don't know if that then answers that question.
Well, it's tangential to it for sure, because it sort of shows that there are limits where it's commercially viable or economically viable to apply technology. I would say that the kind of issues that Warren raised up, and even the water cycle, especially in tropical forests, are quite challenging technically too. That the number of species available, the thickness of the canopies, multi-layered canopies, and all, the rainforests especially, they make it very hard. And besides, forest ecosystems tend to be quite different. So we have faced very different technical issues when trying to map forests, let's say in DRC or Rwanda or Pakistan on the other and very dry land, both with, quite unique and somehow difficult forest resources.
I can also jump in, from a technical point of view. If you're running AI, the quality of the information is always about collecting information, the information on the ground. So some sort of biogeophysical model that may have some sort of historical math based on historical numbers, there's that approach, but that's not an AI approach. And so if this were to be driven by an AI approach, you would need to have data on the ground, and that's expensive to collect to begin with, even in developed countries. So, there's then going to be, again, a cost associated to that in tropical countries. And, I can't comment on the cost and the cost of setting up that type of program. GSI mainly operates on productizing LiDAR, because LiDAR is it is a large area, high quality, high fidelity piece of information that we try to scale with remote sensing in areas where there is no LiDAR.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Matt. Yeah. Josh, you had your hand up briefly. Did you want to take on one of these?
Yeah, I was. Just reflecting that first part of the first question, which was on the digital information for tropical rather than boreal forests, and that got me thinking, because I think that there's definitely a role for digital forest information in both of those zones, and I think that rather than categorizing it as boreal, tropical, it might be better to categorize them as either more natural and complex versus a more simple, closer to plantation style system. So, for example, up in Scotland, we've got a number of really good ecologists, and we've done some really good projects using digital information, not satellite, but things like radio tracking and monitoring and things for red squirrel and golden eagles, both of which are endangered or threatened species up here in Scotland, and monitoring how they interact with forestry operations. So, for example, previously it was thought that forestry operations could disturb red squirrels, or and forestry trucks could disturb golden eagles, and so they would create buffer zones in plantations around those species. But in this context, in a relatively deforested landscape, forestry is actually good for those species, because the plantation forestry is some of the only habitat they have left. And so they collected digital information and found out, okay, we can see that this is the impact, when managed correctly, is quite low on those species, and it's better to have forestry than not. And so you can take a proportionate interaction with forestry in those two species. And I think that the same would apply to a tropical biome, because you have plantation forestry, whether that's eucalyptus in South America, teak in Africa, or what else, where you do have landscapes which have undergone a large degree of change and are now quite heavily managed. So learning how to make those quite, less complex ecosystems function as best as possibly can for endangered species and for ecosystems, I think is a really important thing to try and do, and to bring in digital information to that. So I think it's the degree of complexity rather than the degree of temperature that's important.
Yeah. Thanks, Josh. We have only 2 minutes left. There's also a comment by Sean Mokan, a question about whether blockchain system could help. And I'm sure actually at some point with carbon credits especially, it could and would. But before that, we need to resolve these land tenure issues. But what I'd ask each of you briefly comment now, to wrap it up, is where do you see the first real application with digital forest information to come on board, and what are we missing? Is there still like some missing link that we don't have? And I will start with you, Sixten.
I think we already have real success stories in digitalization. So the use of LiDAR example is a success story, and the next step there is where we have something really valuable. Then we should, for example, go to high-density LiDAR to 20 or even up to 100 points if it's needed. If the value of the forest is so high that the added value you get is greater. So that is for sure. And you could say that use of a wide range of data is also what we need. So we don't need only one type of data. We need a lot of data and good algorithms and AI solutions.
Yeah. Thank you, Sixten. We need to pass on. Matt, your 1 minute or 30-second
So what don't we have, or the biggest difficulty, at least based on my experience, is tracking annual volumetrics and their stock change over time, and doing that in a spatially explicit way. It's very hard to get annual data that has been collected at the same place over time to at least develop a system around. And that has been one of our biggest issues. Okay,
thanks, Matt. And Josh, you get the final word.
Thank you.
First success.
And I think that, I think that one of the barriers is the scale and pace of change in this industry. Things are always changing and developing and improving at such a pace that you can almost think, well, maybe I could wait another year and it's going to get better, it's going to get cheaper, it's going to get smaller. And then so you wait and wait because it's always changing, rather than just, starting to engage, but starting small. Okay, get into it in a small way, and then you can go along with the tide, rather than waiting for technology to have finished before you come in at the end, because it's not going to finish. There's no point that you should be waiting for. And so encouraging a culture change and a mindset change to just starting it at some point, even though it's not going to be perfect.
Okay, thanks very much, Josh. Actually, that reminds me of some words you said in another conference, which says that expect and cherish failure, because this is what you're going to face first anyhow. And no real success story actually is achieved without being tolerant to failures. They are a sign of progress. So let's leave it at that high note. Thank you, everybody, for participation, and thank you for your audience for taking it up this far. I think we're ready for the final words by Warren and whoever comes next to close out the conference. Have a very good evening or working day, depending on what continent you're on.
Thank you.